Hello, and welcome to my show. My name is Bret, and I'm here every week on Thursdays talking about basically DevOps in container land. All things containers, Docker, Kubernetes, Containerd, like you name it. We're talking about YAML today, so we're going to really get into that and validation and what that means. But if you are new to this show, if you haven't watched before, I'm here live every week, so come on Thursdays so you can ask questions. Sometimes I have guests, sometimes it's just me, and sometimes it's just all Q&A. So it's any topic you want to talk about in the world of tech. Usually we try to stick to DevOps topics, but you never know. And we're here chatting with you. So I'm lucky enough to have a guest today. We'll get to that in a second. But before that, in case you didn't know, this show is sponsored by you, my Patreon subscribers. So my patrons there basically give a few dollars a coffee a month, and I really appreciate all of you. If you're interested in all the things I'm creating around Docker and Kubernetes, including open source, blog posts, courses, YouTube videos, this show, the podcast, there's all this stuff. So you can check all that out over at patreon.com/Bret Fisher. You don't have to give me any money if you don't want, which is totally fine. I recommend clicking the follow button, and you'll get about a post a week on all the new things I've created, usually about podcasts and YouTube live shows and stuff like that, but also the courses and other things. So please click that. If you want to show up, by the way, we have a monthly, basically it's a DevOps hangout. We do on our Discord server right there, devops.fan. There's, I think, over 7,000 people now in our DevOps server there in Discord. It's a great community chat system. And once a month, those that are on the High Fivers program, we all just jump in and basically spend our lunch hour, or maybe depending on where you are in the world, it's your evening hour, just talking about the projects we're working on. And it's all DevOps professionals. So if you're interested in that, please check it out at devops.fan or Patreon. Again, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, all of my guests. And this week, I'm very excited to have, all the way from Tel Aviv, almost on the other side of the world, I got Eyar Zilberman. And thank you so much for being here.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for hosting me.
I have two screens here. So if people are watching and they're like, where is Bret looking? I actually have two different screens. So I'm back and forth. Well, thanks for being here. By the way, for those of you, while you're thinking about it, while you're clicking all the buttons and the likes and the thumbs up, our Twitter handles are below. So go check them out on Twitter and follow them if you like. And
That's not my Twitter handle.
That's not your Twitter handle?
No, it's someone else.
The ER1? What? You're joking.
I actually
right?
want to check who is. No, I'm serious about it. I don't know who is it.
Oh, well, it was what was in the profile. So in the document you filled out. So let's get that fixed right now, live on the internet. We're going to fix it. Right.
We have bug in production.
That's right. We're troubleshooting in production. All right. What's the correct handle?
It's Eyar Zil. I will send it.
Oh, okay. Perfect. And we got people from Brazil. Hello. Where are you seeing it?
There you go.
Oh.
In the chat.
Perfect. It must have been a keyboard. Like maybe I accidentally overwrote it on the keyboard or something.
It's fine.
It's got the similar characters.
Yeah, it's close enough.
It's close enough. Does Twitter have "Do you mean"? Yeah. Did you mean?
The @ is correct, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's right. The first character. It was not completely wrong. Well, thanks for being on the show. We're going to talk all about schema validation, which is, at first glance, it seems like, that we're talking about YAML. Why? But for those out there, like if you're implementing anything Kubernetes related, and it's not even just Kubernetes, but we're going to focus on Kubernetes today, right? You will make these mistakes at some point, and you will not realize it until it's either too late or until you are now shipping out a troubleshooting, you're fixing a bug and your schema's all wonked and now you can't even ship it because Kubernetes won't accept it. So I feel like this is vital to every team and a super important topic. So I'm excited to get going on it. When you think about this problem, and like how would you define this problem as like an elevator pitch to me? Why would I care?
Wow. Okay. So you will care because if you won't follow that and you will use invalid schema, it will just won't work.
Right.
That's the best pitch ever, right?
It
You
just
can
won't work.
submit, yeah, it won't work. You can submit a failed YAML to your cluster because it won't be accepted. So that's the elevator pitch. But if I'm allowed to give more than the elevator pitch, so let's
Yeah.
talk about validation itself. So in the Kubernetes ecosystem, and I guess it's actually relevant to every infrastructure as code, there are 4 steps of validation, and people actually never put it into different steps. So I guess they are doing it, but they just don't know that this is how they work. So let
Right.
me just list them so we can have so we know what we're talking about. So the first thing that you want to make sure that you have a valid file. Let's have an example. I want to make sure that my YAML file is valid, JSON file, whatever. The second thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that the schema is correct. We'll talk more about it the entire show, so I'm going to skip to the next step. After that, you want to make sure that you are following best practices. And the final step is that you want to make sure that it's following your organization policy. So it sounds really simple. Let's break it down. So what is a valid file? In this
Right.
example, a valid Kubernetes. So a valid a valid YAML file is it doesn't help if you just put, I don't know, kubernetes.yaml. It won't make it a YAML file. A valid YAML file is if you have key value, right? And the difference between that and schema is that you need to have a valid schema for your Kubernetes files in order for them to be accepted. So I know it's still a little vague. I will try to explain it a little bit better. So every Kubernetes file is a YAML file, but not every YAML file is a Kubernetes file. Make sense?
Totally.
Okay, cool. So now that we established that, what's unique about a Kubernetes file, and which make it a Kubernetes file? So, for example, it's have to have API version. It's have to have a kind property.
Yep.
It's have to have a metadata property, and some other stuff. But basically, this is the mandatory configuration.
Right. The minimum.
The
Yeah.
bare minimum, exactly. So if you don't have that, it won't be a Kubernetes file, but it can still be a YAML file. So the thing is that you want to make sure that you have all the mandatory properties. And let's say that you are using, I don't know, deployment or cron job or something like that. So you have a bunch of other properties that need to be exist on this specific kind of deployment when you're submitting it to your cluster. Okay.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed, especially in my courses, is a lot of people are actually starting with Kubernetes and maybe to a certain extent Docker Compose, which is also YAML, and that's their first entry into YAML. You know, the data language or whatever you want to call this, the YAML itself. But so that's part of the challenge too, is that they're learning not only what has to be in there, but also how it has to be formatted, because YAML can be particular, and and not everyone realizes some of the errors that they can have, and not all of the default, like you're saying, it doesn't work, right? Things eventually won't work, but the errors sometimes are just so vague or confusing to a lot of people that it's a common question in our courses around, like, there's a problem here, and I don't understand the problem, and then it's usually something to do in the file. It's either invalid YAML or it's an invalid resource type, or there's a spelling error, or there's just values in the schema spec that aren't real. So sorry, please continue. I'm agreeing with you on this problem.
You're right. It's really confusing because, for example, in most properties in Kubernetes start with a small letter. For example, if you want to write kind, metadata, whatever. But when you state the kind type, it starts with a capital letter. Deployment with a capital D. Cron job with a capital C. So it's inconsistent, and this is what's confusing people, and this is also what's causing those problems, because if you're going to put deployment with a small d, it won't be the same, and it will fail. And it's funny because it's one character away from becoming an invalid schema, invalid file, which result as invalid configuration that you can't push to your cluster. So it's really, really small stuff that you need to be aware of. And this is schema. But I also want to explain what is not schema. Okay. So schema is everything that is considered as best practices or internal policies and are not mandatory in order to create a valid file. For example, I can deploy a Kubernetes deployment file without mentioning the CPU limit or
Right.
memory limit or whatever. And it will still be a valid Kubernetes file, it will still be a valid YAML file. It's fine. But we all know that it's actually a mandatory best practice that you want to make sure that you have on your configuration.
Yeah. In fact, certain security tools, this was a topic of conversation recently on one of our monthly DevOps chat things that I mentioned earlier in the show, where people were talking about like security tools are now alerting that you don't have resource limits, which I have mixed feelings and opinions on.
Oh, I also have an opinion about that.
Yeah, because I feel like it's on the. I was like, well, is this security? I mean, yes, maybe. Yeah, it's a stretch. They're trying to add value. I get it, but a lot of us, we'll deploy for the longest time, especially when we're learning these tools. We'll just keep doing this, and it's all working. And that's the great example of a kind of thing where eventually it will bite you that you don't have it. Then you end up setting a standard, but how do you enforce that standard? That's a great topic. So.
Yeah, but again, this is not something that I want to include together with the schema. It's another topic, you're right. It's something that you need to enforce. It's something that you need to include, but it's not schema. Because like I said, it will still be a valid Kubernetes file also if you don't mention the CPU limit, or even if you're using tag latest, which is a shitty practice, but again, it will still valid, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, cool. So now that we established the knowledge about what is schema and what is not schema, we can actually talk about what's the problem with that. So the thing is that schema, the way that I think about schema is like unit test for your configuration. This is the way that I love to think about it. And in the Kubernetes space, someone already did all the heavy lifting and already wrote all the different unit tests. And this is the Kubernetes JSON schema. So think about it. Someone actually mapped all the different properties that need to be there in all the different metrics and combinations of deployment and the cron job and daemon set and whatever, all the different stuff that you have there. Someone, I guess it's not someone, it's a lot of people. It's the community, it's us.
Right.
So someone wrote those unit tests and actually defined how the schema should look like. So someone did all the heavy lifting for us. It's cool. And now all is left to do is actually to make sure that we are following those unit tests. So we're actually doing it by default, also if we don't know. The second that we are doing kubectl apply and we are pushing resource into the cluster, this is actually something that's happening on the server side on the background.
Okay.
And as it's running, it's actually doing that, and it's doing some other validations that are not part of the schema, and you expect them to be a part of the schema, but it's another topic. We can maybe talk about it later. Don't go into the source code of Kubernetes. It's a rabbit hole, I'm telling you.
Right.
Never mind. So they are doing all this kind of validation, and if it actually see that something is missing, let's give the example, you misspelled deployment and you used it with a small letter, so it will reject it and it actually won't try to apply it into your cluster. It will tell you that you have a problem, it's not valid. So that's cool. So what's the problem? If it's happening by default, why do we need to talk about it?
Right.
So the problem is that it's happening only when you're trying to push it to your cluster.
Right.
And you want to actually catch it as soon as possible. All the shift left approach, which I truly believe in that.
Oh, for sure.
You want to catch it when it's happening. You don't want to catch it when someone's trying to deploy it.
Yeah. And a lot of these things eventually get automated. I would say that, like, in my experience with Kubernetes and applying changes, GitOps and those approaches of automated YAML, essentially applying YAML, those tools are getting popular and popular. In fact, when I start to get with companies now on new projects, they already have a plan for whether they're using Flux or Fleet or Argo or whatever the tool is. And those those would be the tools that fail, and that's too late, right? Because now you have now you're troubleshooting essentially a production system, and maybe part of your resources applied, but then the critical one that has that spelling error in it isn't there, but the other ones are. So now you've got a mismatch, and that just it fails badly in a lot of ways, especially when you start to automate. It's like automation just basically makes late game failures just really suck instead of. So yes, shift left. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, also the problem that in some companies, the person that's actually pushing it, the person, we love to say CI/CD, but we need to remember that it's actually two processes. It's CI and CD,
right?
And sometimes it's not happening together. So the person that's doing the CI is not always the person that's doing the CD. So it's funny if the person that's doing the CD is getting an error that someone early on the funnel actually made, and now it's like a context switch. I need to talk with this guy and telling him that he need to fix it because it's actually not applied to the cluster,
Right. You got the operations engineer that's manually applying these things to a particular cluster, but they didn't make the PR for the change, so
exactly.
they may not be the expert on exactly why it's failing now, whereas the last deployment didn't fail. Yeah.
So I feel that we all agree that we need to shift it left, right?
Right.
We're all on the same page on that. Cool. So let's talk about ways to do it. Cool. As you as you think you can do it natively with kubectl, it's actually have a flag, a really cool flag, which is called dry run. So it's kubectl ---- dry run, and then you need to pass an argument. It will be client or server, because there's a difference between if you want to have a server validation, you actually need to connect it to you need to have a running cluster.
Yeah.
So you need to have a connection to your cluster. And if you're doing it on the with the client argument, so you also need to have a cluster up and running, and it's need to be connected.
Even for client, really?
Wait, what did I say? Yeah, exactly. Also for client. And
okay.
That's weird. Why? Yeah. Why do I have it for client? So I looked into it, and apparently it's not a feature, it's a bug.
Oh.
But it's just another bug among 1,000 and something bugs that you have on the Kubernetes project.
Yeah.
And right now, no one is taking care of it.
Right.
It's already open there for more than 1 year.
So once we had server options for a dry run, first, I clearly don't know the client side because I never run it, so I didn't realize it needed a cluster. I always assumed it would be easier to use the client side for default. Again, I guess we're going to get into this, I'm sure, like default resources versus CRD, stuff like that. And I just assumed that it was the client side was really meant for scenarios where you wanted to test the validation, but you didn't have a cluster to talk to, so you just wanted an automated tool to check for you, or maybe you put it into your editor as some sort of background check or something like that. So this isn't possible today, it sounds like.
Impossible.
Okay.
So this is exactly, it should work exactly like you described it, but it's impossible. It's actually a bug, and it's need to have a connection to your cluster in order to work. So it's make it irrelevant at all. Okay. So by the way, if you do have a connection to your cluster, the best way, like I will start with the good news. The best way to do it is actually with the native tool, which is kubectl dry run. But it's only if you have the privilege to have a connection to your cluster. When you don't have this privilege, so let's say I work in an organization and not all the developers in my organization have a connection to my cluster because it makes sense. You don't want to have all your developers connection to your cluster, your production clusters. So it won't work for them.
Yeah.
Another place that it won't work is if you don't want your CI to be connected to your cluster, which also makes sense. So sure, your CD should be connected to your cluster, or because it's need to push it eventually. But sometimes you don't want your CI machines to be connected to your cluster.
Right.
So it also won't work there. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when there's a trick to managing, because very few times does someone have just one cluster, right? So then you end up with all these clusters. And as people, I've seen this in projects with customers where as they get more secure, they don't necessarily want the single CI solution to have access to every cluster possible, because then it just becomes such a target for any nefarious activity, because it has the ability to write to every possible machine all over the planet. So it, I see where that starts to become a problem too, where you can't talk to the server that you really need to talk to in order to validate. So you're just going to have to wing it.
Yeah.
So how does that happen?
Yeah, so now that we understand the problem and we understand why we can't use the built-in solution, I went into a little digging and looked for solutions. I like, no way I'm the only one that's trying to check for schema offline. Like, there's no way I'm the only one that have this problem. And I Googled around and I found a solution, and the solution was called, it's a cool tool that I think it's actually part of the ecosystem. Wait, let me find the name. Sorry, forgot the name. Yeah, it's kubeval. So have you tried kubeval before?
It sounds familiar, but I obviously haven't typed it recently because I don't. It's not even in my. It's not pre-populating in my browser. I was looking it up.
Yeah, so kubeval is solving exactly the problem that I described right now. It's doing the schema validation and it's doing it offline. What's the problem? The problem is that it's missing some key features. So yeah, exactly. So one of the key features that it's missing, in my opinion, is supporting CRDs.
Yeah.
So CRDs are becoming more and more and more popular, and it's actually not supporting it. And another problem is that it looks like this project got abandoned.
Oh.
Because
this is how I use it. I just realized. Sorry, I totally interrupted you, but this is how I'm using it in SuperLinter, which I've talked a lot about this year. It's like the all-in-one linting, and this was our first big problem with basically one of our DevOps repos, right? It's because all these repos are labeled some sort of DevOps tool. Was that it's doing the kubeval, but who doesn't have CRDs, and it immediately fails all of our builds because this doesn't find CRD. So you have to like turn off the CRD checking, which isn't off by default, which seems weird. Yeah. So please, I feel the pain. Please continue. Thank you for reminding me.
The thing is that also, if you wanted to run some kind of schema validation on your CRDs, you can't do it with this tool. It's not supporting it. And another problem is that, like I mentioned, it's actually got abandoned. It's looked like that. I'm sorry, Garrett is the maintainer of this project. I'm sorry if I got it wrong, but it looked like the last commit was a really long time ago. And right now, the last time that I checked, the version Kubernetes version that it's supporting is 1.18. And if I remember correctly, we already have 1.22 out there.
Yeah.
And
yeah, Garrett's a great guy, so we're definitely
a great
not.
Guy, really
yeah. I've actually had him on this show a couple times, and this is the challenge, right, of open source too. And this has happened multiple times with me this year in linters specifically, because they get released by a passionate team that's like, we need linting for X or Y, and so I would call this this is a variation of linting here. It's not necessarily strict linting, but it gets released, but the maintenance is the nightmare. Like keeping it up to date in anything related to Kubernetes, just every time there's a release, it's going to break your stuff, and then over and over and over again. And that's a hard thing for a team when they're constantly releasing new open source. So I feel for this team, but I can't fix it myself, right? This is like one of those challenges. It's like, I want to help, but I'm not that guy.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not the right guy. Exactly. So yeah, Garrett is a great guy. He started that. He was the first to work on a solution for that. But I feel like Garrett have other project that is doing right now, and maybe it's got like on the low burner or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
And anyway, so it's not supporting CRDs and it's not supporting new releases of Kubernetes, and it's important because every new release have its own syntax and its own properties that need to be validated in order to make sure that they are a valid Kubernetes file. Okay, so having said that, I looked around and I found this. It was a kind of small project, and it had like, I don't know, 200 stars when I explored it, when I found it for the first time. the name of the project was KubeConform.
KubeConform.
And yeah, KubeConform. And KubeConform is actually a really nice project, and the way that it market itself is saying that basically it's like kubeval, only faster, supports CRDs, and up to date with the Kubernetes schema. So you also have version 1.22.
Nice.
Yeah. So, it's looked like a side project that someone did, because it's actually not listed under any organization like kubeval. It's listed under a private person.
Yeah.
His name is Jan. So the first thing that I did is I actually emailed him and I talked with him. So he's a super, super, super cool guy. And he wrote this awesome project from a pure passion, just because he wanted to. Not any other reason. He tried the kubeval. He saw that kubeval is not good enough for his needs. And he said, like, what every other developer is saying, I can do it better. So I'm going to open my own shop.
Right.
So he wrote his own project, which is based on kubeval. So it was, a lot of the code is actually taken from there, and it's fine. But he added all those stuff that are needed, like the CRD support and the new versions for Kubernetes.
Nice.
So yeah, so right now, the best solution, if you want to check for your Kubernetes schema and you want to do it offline, do it with this project. It's still a small project. It only have like 300 or 400 stars, something like that, right? And it's actually maintained. The primary maintainer is a private person. It's Jan, but he's a cool guy. He's like, every time that someone is opening a pull request, he's reviewing it, and every time that someone is opening an issue, he's like responding really quick. So it looks like he's on top of it.
All right. So we need to basically swap out kubeval for KubeConform.
Yeah.
And you said it supports custom resources?
Yeah, it supports custom resources, which is pretty cool. You need to add a little background, walk around, because basically, how can it actually? Let's think about it. So, how can it support Kubernetes? Because someone already wrote those unit tests. You remember that we talked about unit tests. How can it support CRDs if it's my own resource? I never wrote the unit test for that, right? So there is actually a workaround for it, because once you submit the CRD, you're actually also defining the schema inside. You have properties called schema inside the CRD.
Yeah.
So this CRD exists on your cluster with the schema itself. So what you can do is that you can pull it from your cluster, write it into a file, and then you can use KubeConform to actually as an input, and then it will do the validation on the CRD from the file it's extracted from your cluster.
Very nice. I feel like I've actually seen this tool, but I didn't implement it. I'm not sure why.
Because if you look at the README, it looks like overwhelming.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information there. It's not easy to start. But
I wouldn't be surprised.
You are hooked.
Oh yeah, I feel like I probably was looking at it because of the exact kubeval problem you were describing, and I was frustrated and thinking, okay, well, we're really only getting partial support here with this linter. Let me go see if there's another solution. And probably exactly like you did, I stumbled onto it, and then I read a bunch and went, okay, I don't got time for this right now. I'm gonna I'll come back to it, and then I never did. So
let me summarize it for you. It's doing everything that you are looking for. This is the tool that you need to go with if you want to do schema validation. Okay. Actually, this tool is so great that we actually implement it inside Datree, which is also an open source.
Okay.
Because we had this problem with our users. So what we're doing in Datree. So we talked about me. So I don't know if I actually said. So I'm from Datree. I'm leading the product. I did. Okay. So
yeah,
right.
So welcome to the show. You're from Datree.
Hi, I'm Eyar from Datree. Yeah, I'm Eyar from Datree. Datree is an open source tool for developers. It's helped them prevent Kubernetes misconfigurations from reaching production. And you can also go to our GitHub project. As you can see, we have 5,000 stars. It's a popular project. We have a lot of love from the community, and I can promise you that this is an active project that is well maintained. Okay. So what happened with our users is that we are providing policies for our users. You can use built-in rules, or you can create your own custom rules with Datree. And the thing is that a lot of our users came to us and said like, "Hey, I have a problem. It's look like I don't know. It's past your policy."
Mm-hmm.
For example, I had a policy that you want to make sure that you don't use image tag latest. We mentioned it's a bad practice. Or you want to make sure that you have a memory or CPU or whatever. So it's past the policy, but it's still failing to be applied to the cluster. So we checked the YAML and we said like, yeah, sure, of course it's failing. It's because your schema is not valid. And it's like, but if it's passing the policy, why I'm not able to push it to the cluster? It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And they are totally right. If it's passing your best practices and policy, how come you can't push it? And then we said like it was a Eureka moment. And this is how I actually started to investigate all the schema thing from the get-go. So it was like, okay, so they are totally right. It's need to be a prerequisite for every file that we check. Because there's no reason for us to check a file if it's not a valid YAML file and it's not a valid Kubernetes file.
Right.
So let's add this built-in option that every file that we check that is aligned with your policy is also a valid Kubernetes file, also a valid schema file. So as an engineer, you don't want to create something from nothing. You want to use something that someone else did already, right?
Right.
This is why we have open source. So this is why I try to find a solution that we do the schema validation part for us. The ML part, it was easy to find a solution. You have YQ and a bunch of other open source that can do it for you. But for the schema, we start to investigate and look into it and do benchmarking we thought about different options. Maybe we need to have a cluster that is running, and then we can connect it in a way that you can still run the kubectl, but in offline mode or whatever. So we try to do like different ways. We try to think about different ways to do it. And then we stumble with the kube-conform project. I talked with Jan. I asked him, can we use your project as part of our tool? He said like, you're open source, I'm open source. Yeah, let's help the community. So we said like, wow, thank you very much. And this is how I actually this is how we started implementing kube-conform into Datree. So today, every time that you're doing a policy check with Datree, it's actually also in the background, it's doing schema validation and YAML validation. And when it's doing the schema validation, it's doing it with kube-conform.
Okay.
Cool. So that's the different ways that you can use kube-conform. You can actually use it as a CLI. You can use it in our own CLI, but you can also use it as a package. This is how our CLI is using it. It's consuming it as a Go package.
Okay.
And since it's integrated inside the tool. Yeah. Do you want me to share the screen to show you like how it's look like?
Yeah. Let's check it out.
Okay, cool.
I love this definition of like breaking down and like isolating the three different types of concern that we essentially have around all these. It's Kubernetes plus every YAML, it's every configuration file, but Kubernetes in particular has this problem where, like I was describing earlier, people may be new to YAML and since they're not scanning or verifying or validating their YAML in any way, it ends up being these tools later, whether it's Kubernetes itself or Helm or some other tool that's applying it, and they're not always giving the great experience about exactly what's wrong with your YAML. And so I love the idea of having a dedicated YAML check first, because then I'm assuming it'll be a little bit more obvious to me that, oh no, I put in too many spaces, or this is an array, but I have, it's a list, but I formatted it like an array, or whatever. I've done all the wrong things I've done. So
all of us, don't worry.
Yeah, and you stare at the command line and you're reading this error message for like the 10th time, and you're going, I should be able to understand what this means, but I don't know what this is. I don't know how to fix it. It's usually, I think I understand what it means, but I don't know what to do to fix it. So this is cool. Let's see. Let's share your screen.
Okay, so I'm sorry in advance. You're going to see it on Windows. So
no judgment here, man.
No judgment here. You promise? Okay, so this is the PC that I'm using for games. So this is why I'm using Windows. This is my excuse.
It's probably your fastest computer if you're gaming on it, I would assume. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm one of those weird people that still tries to game on Mac, and all my friends make fun of me because I play I play World of Warcraft and like other, and they're like, why don't you buy a Windows machine? And I don't want to. I mean, I have a Windows server in the closet. I have lots of Windows machines. I just don't want to buy a dedicated gaming machine, especially with the prices of graphics cards right now. So no judgment here. It works the same, I assume, regardless of your OS, right?
It's the same on the Mac OS, Linux, and also on Windows. So basically, this is an article that I wrote about this problem of schema validation. It's actually covering all the topics that we talked about. So if someone wants to read more about it and he forgot about something, you can check it out later. And let's see how it looks like. Okay, so let's say I have this YAML file. Okay, and like we said, it's a valid YAML file. I can have
Can
it's a valid YAML file. It's a valid sure. It's a valid Kubernetes file. All cool, no issues here. So let's run it with Datree. So basically, I already installed it. It's a CLI tool, and the command is just Datree test and the file that you want to test. In this example, it's the Kubernetes demo that we have here, right? So what it's doing, it's like I mentioned, YAML validation, schema validation, and then I have a policy. And right now in a policy, I have only 2 rules. And like you can see, I'm actually failing those 2 rules. One of them is that I want to make sure that I have replica between 2 and 10. And another thing is the pinned version that we talked about. So with Datree, what you can do is that you can actually control the setups, the rules that you have there. You can do it from the dashboard, or you can do it from policy as code. You can do it with a configuration file. And the cool thing is that everything that I will do here will actually be populated into my terminal. So you talked about a confusing message, right? So I can actually change it to say like, please talk with Eyar. And let's click submit, and let's turn off this rule. Let's turn off this rule. And what will happen now is that, yes, turn off, cool. And so let's run it again. Same file, I didn't make any changes, only changed the policy. So now only 1 rule is failing because I turned 1 rule off, and now it's changed the message. So instead of telling you don't use tag latest, it's using the message that I wrote inside the UI. Again, everything can also be configured with code because we are all developers. We believe in infrastructure as code.
Right.
Okay, so that's the basic example. Now let's do something that will fail the schema. So we talked about this example. Let's do it with a small d. And now let's run it again. Same file. And now what it will do, it's doing the YAML validation, and it's not doing the policy check. Why it's not doing the policy check? Because it's actually not passing the schema validation. Like you can see, kind must be one of the following deployment.
How does it know that it wants it to be a deployment?
It's smart enough. No, I'm kidding.
Does it read into the spec and see that there's other things that are deployment like?
No, it's much more simple than that. It's not AI. It's not nothing. It's nothing like that. It's the person that wrote the unit test actually can describe the fail message. So it's inside the schema definition itself.
Okay. So this is kube conform running on this step, right?
On the background, it's actually kube conform that is integrated inside the tree. Yeah.
Right. I think I have a related question. Manvidar asks, can I write this? What was the question exactly? Can I do this for my own CRDs? I think that's what he's asking for, or they're asking for is, if you have a custom resource definition, my question related to this, and hopefully this will answer their question, do I put that in the policy, or do I put that in the schema validation?
So I don't have a ready example for that, but
sure, that's fine.
Actually, everything that I have a documentation for that. It's the second best thing. So because we have a bigger community, we actually have really good documentation on all our features and also for the CRD part. So if someone actually want to check how to do it with his own CRDs, how to do the schema validation, the examples together with the video is on the docs, on our docs. You need me to.
All right. Yeah.
So, and by the way, if someone need help with that, so you can also feel free to go to our own project and just open an issue, and I promise you that someone will help you with that. There's always someone that
will notice.
Answering.
Yeah, someone will notice if there's yeah.
And this is the cool part about open source that is backed by a company.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually someone that his job is to make sure that all issues are answered. And we don't have stale issues, and we don't have issue that someone opened and there's no response to pull request that is not reviewed. Every time that someone's opening a pull request, or every time that someone is opening an issue, someone will look into it.
Right.
So that's about the schema. The same thing with the YAML. So let's do something that is that will break the YAML. Oh, this is something funny that I'm actually really surprised that this is breaking YAMLs. You know that? It's not to be tree. Yeah, it will break the YAML. Yeah, look. There you go. Which is silly.
Yeah.
Why do we care if it's like 3 or 2? I don't know, whatever. Yeah. So this is how it will work with the tree. Every time that you're trying to scan something, it will make the YAML validation, it will make the schema validation. And another cool thing is that you can pass the version that you want to check. So let's give a use case. Let's say I want to upgrade my cluster into version 120, and right now I'm using 118. So I don't want stuff to break. So how can I make sure that nothing is going to break? So what you can do is that you can do it in 2 ways. You can use the tree with our dashboard or from the terminal, and you can actually go over here and you can choose the version that you want to check against. So let's change it to 122 in this example. And let's run the file again. And right now it would check the schema against version 122 instead of 120, which was there before. Right. So you can run it on the resources that you have locally, and then you can see what is breaking and what is deprecated in new versions of Kubernetes. So that's another really use case. And the best part, it's working offline. So it can be integrated inside your CI. It can be integrated as a Git hook, pre-commit hook. We have all the possible integrations. Again, one of our strengths is the documentation. So if you want to check like different integrations that we have documentation for everything. And we also have it as a Helm plugin. So the Helm plugin also including the schema validation.
So it reads Kubernetes YAML, Helm charts, and I'm assuming customize? Does it support all 3?
Yeah, of course. So let me tell you a secret, and please don't tell it to anyone.
Yeah, it's not on the internet or anything.
Yeah, it's not on the internet. Also Helm and also customize and all the other stuff that are templating for Kubernetes. In the end, you have a manifest file that is generated and it's pushed to your cluster. Mm-hmm. So you can always generate the manifest with Helm. You can do it with Helm template, with customize. I don't remember the command, but
because we don't have a Helm. Sorry, but yeah, we don't have a Helm controller anymore, right? So yeah, it has to be client side.
Exactly.
That's a great point.
And then you can just pipe it into the tool that you need, if it's kubeconfirm or the tree. But in the tree case, it's actually working with the plugin, so you don't need to pipe it. You can just use the plugin, and it will work with your charts.
Great. Is this something I'm guessing that I could put in a GitHub Action?
Yeah, sure, of course. GitHub Action is basically a CI.
Yeah.
So we don't have a GitHub so not a lot of people know it, but actually there is GitHub Action and there's a GitHub workflow. App. So I guess your question is, can I put it as part of my GitHub workflow? Because we don't have a GitHub Action. GitHub Action is the abstraction there that you can just call, you can pass arguments and stuff like that. So we don't have that yet. If someone wants to submit a pull request, we'll accept it. Please do.
There you
But
go.
you can integrate it inside the workflow because GitHub Action, which is weird, it's also the name of the CI. So GitHub Action as a CI is a CI, so it can be
Yeah.
integrated. It's a CLI tool, so you can put it everywhere. It's work in Jenkins or Argo or whatever you're using.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I've been talking about GitHub Actions all year because I've been using them a lot. I've now defaulted all of my repos to at least doing something like superlinter in them at minimum, if not automatically building containers. And you're right. I wish they would have called it GitHub Workflows because GitHub Action is buzzworthy. It sounds cool, but it's confusing to talk about. Oh, it's an action in a workflow, but the tool is called GitHub Actions, but you're actually running workflows, not actions. The actions are in the workflow.
Exactly.
It doesn't make any sense to anyone. So.
The same goes with the kind type deployment.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you call it deployment? Like you need to deploy your deployment. It's like it's a saved word. Why do you use it deployment? Why Kubernetes people? Why you chose this word?
Yeah. And so unfortunately, replica site was already taken, I guess, because of the other resource. So they had to come up with something. Yeah, and that's a challenge too, because like I think you mentioned earlier, like at the command line, you can abbreviate a lot of these things, right? So I can type deploy instead of deployment or whatever, and case is not specific, but in the YAML. And I'm also a very lazy person, so I'm glad you're using VS Code because there's at least some of that basic YAML validation going on in VS Code due to what is it, JSONschema.org, I think is I forget the name of the URL that stores all the JSON standards for a lot of the default.
It's schema store.
Yes, thank you. And that just kind of happens out of the box with VS Code. And I love that. I love that at least there's something there in my editor. So for those of you out there not using VS Code, this is yet another reminder. Please, it's my go-to DevOps editor. So, use that tool. And obviously, I'm also a Vim person, but it takes a lot of extra effort to make all that stuff work in Vim, whereas it just happens out of the box with VS Code. Do you know of anyone who's got like a VS Code task to automatically run this every time there's a save or that they manually run the task inside of VS Code? Have you heard of that?
Yeah. So we have people that integrate it as a Git commit hook. So every time they are doing a Git commit, it's running the tree in the background. And we also have a really cool flag, which is basically saying only check for Kubernetes files. So this way it won't spam you and check for YAML files that are not supposed to be checked by the tree.
Yeah. Like Docker Compose YAML or...
Yeah, exactly. Because we're looking for YAML files, right?
Right.
So it's also a YAML file. So this way it will skip them and it will only check for your Kubernetes files. And we also have an integration with pre-commit hook. Are you familiar with the framework?
With what? Sorry.
Pre-commit, sorry. It's a package manager for commit hooks.
No, I didn't know about this. All right.
Yeah. So check it out. It's a really popular framework. It's really nice. And we also have a solution for that, another integration that we added recently. So if someone have an idea about another integration that we can do, we can do it, no problem.
Pre-commit. Man, I'm learning all sorts of stuff today.
Yeah.
So this would be all client side, right? Like stuff that's on my system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and this is an important point that may have already been said, but from my point of view, because I'm more of the ops, the person that's implementing these automated solutions for CD, right? That's usually my world. I don't spend so much time as a developer making code. I usually am helping the developer team. And one of my experiences is that all this pre-commit, like anything in my local system, tooling, superlinter, all the running all the binaries, VS Code tasks, pre-commit hooks, these are all great. But I can't rely on it as the ops person because there's always that one developer that doesn't do any of that on the team.
So that's solving that. Because it's actually a package manager for commits, for pre-commit hooks. So it's the only thing that you can include it inside the project sound. If someone doing someone will do something, it will install it automatically or something like that. But it will store all the hooks that you list. And the thing is that I totally agree with you. This is why I'm a true believer in write it once and run it everywhere. So this is why the concept that we have in Datree is the centralized policy concept. Everything that you do on the dashboard will propagate to all the CLIs that are on the same account. So there's a token that you can pass between the accounts. You can set it as environment variable or set it in a configuration file. And then all the policy that you define in your dashboard can be actually enforced for different people.
Cool.
And then if you want to change it, you can turn off rules, change the text, whatever. You do it in one place and be automatically propagated to all the clients that are using the CLI.
All right. We have a few questions. I want to make sure we get to those. By the way, for those of you watching, last call for questions. I'm going to put that in chat because we're about like 15 seconds behind real time on the internet. So, all right. Yeah. Ivor has got a question. Are there plans for error highlighting inside the IDE itself? So IDE, I guess, meaning my editor?
I guess like he's talking about a VS Code, the extension, something like that, right? So yeah, it's something on the roadmap. The thing is that we're trying to think about how to implement it correctly, because it's really hard it's almost impossible to understand from the manifest itself which Kubernetes version you are running against. So I guess it's something that you need to define, and then we will be able to do the validation. So it's something that we're working on.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm the one that learns about those deprecations when I run kubectl, and it says you are out of date, sir. Your version is wrong. And so my API version is always they're always out of date. I should just like buy that domain. Outdated schema is basically my job. You were saying VS Code extension, so this is exactly what he was looking for. And I could see how you would then have to yet another thing inside the bottom bar of my VS Code that has no room for additional extensions that maybe would allow me to choose the version of the schema that it's automatically checking in the file. Yeah, and that's an interesting point too, because like the file, if we all are writing like we hopefully should be writing, we keep one resource per one YAML file ideally, and that's my preferred way. It's the way I teach and recommend it, because inevitably it'll be a huge file with lots and lots of resources. And so the resources version of the API, but those resource versions vary across different cluster versions. And so, because I could have an old CRD and a new cluster and vice versa. So at first glance, I'm like, no, it makes no sense to put the Kubernetes version in the YAML file. But then now for this kind of exact problem, it's like, yeah, it would be great if there was a comment, at least maybe a YAML comment that we can at least standardize the version. This is sometimes how Docker does Dockerfile experimental extensions and stuff, is they'll allow you to put in a comment that triggers something in a tool. So that my random suggestion is probably not worth anything, but yeah, maybe a comment that specifies the Kubernetes version.
So it will solve that problem, but I didn't mention the other problem. It won't work if you are using Helm, because you need to render somehow the template, right? And if you're working on the values or working on the chart, you have a lot of how do you call it, like all the placeholders for the variables. So it won't be able to validate it, because you need to tell us this chart goes with this value file. So we can render it in the background, tell you if it's valid or not.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming when Helm,
issue.
Windows,
maybe
it removes
20%,
comments too.
Only 20% of all Kubernetes users are using the raw Kubernetes. I guess
right.
The majority are using the templating if it's customized or Helm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody starts with that. In fact, I start with that in courses, obviously for training purposes. But yeah, eventually, I like customized just because I feel like it's more YAML-y.
Natively. Yeah.
Yeah. But almost everyone I work with is doing Helm. Like it's almost inevitable. And maybe they do. I'm actually working on a project now where they have both. In fact, we have Helm using customized templates on top of them in order to spit out. So it's like Helm into customize. Yeah, don't ask. But yeah. let's think of another way to make it more complicated.
It's a second to actually understand what you mean.
I guess maybe I guess the Helm is translated into manifest, and then that's pumped into a customize. I'm not exactly sure how it works. So thank you so much for this. I've learned a ton. I'm definitely going to be reading up on pre-commit stuff, because like I don't know why I didn't learn about that earlier. And this is a great review for me on a lot of the things around schema validation that I assume work but don't, like the server versus client. And I will actually ask you after the show, for those watching, I'll look in the description below. I'll ask you after the show if we can find the issue, and I'll just put it in the show notes that that we're so people can understand more of that client versus server. The dry run. So for those of you out there, if you don't know about dry run, go check out dry run. What is there anything else that you want to leave with rather? Any last tips or?
Yeah, sure. So I will share the links with you, and I will also share a link to my repository with all the examples about schema validation and all the stuff that I used for my research when I wrote the blog post. And if you have any questions, or the audience have any questions, just open an issue there. If you want to ask me something about schema, or if you have something about the tree, you can ask it in the Datree project. I'm a watcher on both repositories, so don't worry, I will see it. And one last thing, let me think. I guess that's it. Oh yeah, you know what? I have one thing to say. If you do want to use kubectl in your workflow, but you want to do it offline, you can still use this hack. And the hack is that you can use Minikube or Kind.
Right.
And then it will actually
spin that up really quick.
Yeah, exactly. And then it will actually have a cluster that it can connect with to do all the validation. The downside will be that it's have to be similar to your production environments with namespaces and all the other stuff.
The right version, the right CRDs. Yeah. That's kind of one of my future projects is I've been making a lot of GitHub Action samples and examples this year. And that's kind of the next thing I want to do is have a usable real world scenario where you're spinning up Kind every single time. Not for schema validation, but that's a great reason. More for just a GitHub Action to try and deploy and simply validate that your health checks work, like a very simple inline test in GitHub Action, so that every time someone commits a PR or has a PR getting ready to merge, that it just goes up. I deployed. Does your app health checks work? Like as a bit, because that kind of is a generic. It's a generic test that doesn't require a lot of customization per repo. Because I'm always looking for that for students and other people. By the way, last question. Manvidar asked JSONnet. I guess maybe is that supported?
JSONnet?
I guess that's
Can
what
you show me?
Yeah. Is it
JSONnet,
another templating language for JSON?
JSONnet.
I've never had to use it. It's
a templating language.
Yeah, I've never had to use it. So luckily, which I'm not going to complain about because I have way too many templating languages. I was an old mustache handlebar, all those things back in the day. I guess because maybe you haven't heard about it, then
it's not supported. But again, open a ticket enhancement, and someone will pick it up and put it in the roadmap. Don't worry.
Yeah.
By the way, the person that is responsible to put stuff on the roadmap is me, so I promise you we get
So you'll be doing work. You've got work ahead of you. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I mean, we could talk. The thing is, we could talk about this forever. So, at some point, we've got to cut it off. I feel like there's so many best practices in here, and talking about little details and nuances that, for those of you that aren't watching this live, this will definitely be one of our podcast episodes. So if you didn't know, this show actually turns into a podcast at some point, and you can just get that at bretfisher.com over there or there. I can never point to the right place on the screen. You can get the podcast there, which is audio only, obviously. So I did get a tweet from someone this week that they were listening to it while running. I'm not always recommending that. I think I need music.
How do you do the share screen on podcast?
We either skip it or we have a great editor that figures out basically, does this make any sense to anyone in audio only? If not, we'll just cut that part out and then we'll continue the conversation. And then sometimes I actually put in there, we are now demoing this product and we're going to skip this part and we're skipping ahead to the next topic. So yeah, that's kind of how it works.
I have to tell you something about it. My article about the schema was also got published on opensource.com. And one of the requirements is that you can't have images inside your article. And can you guess why?
Copyright? I have no idea.
Blind developers that want to read the blog and can't read it if it's reading them the text.
Not accessible.
Not accessible.
Yeah. I thought we had metadata for that on HTML. Interesting. So I want people to follow the now correct Twitter handle, not the one that was on there at the beginning. And you can find Datree over. I've put all these links, by the way. They're all in the chat. They're all going to be in the description after the show. I think a couple of them are already there now. So people can Go check out this open source tool. See what the company is doing, what it's about. I guess the point here that we're going to leave everybody with is you need to be doing some sort of validation, and this is probably the easiest way known to. Yeah, you're going to do it eventually. It's going to happen whether you want to or not. It just may be validating on your server and then throwing you down a troubleshooting rabbit hole that you don't want to be a part of. So this sounds like a really great solution. I'm glad that we talked about it and had you on the show. Thank you all for being here. We will be live again next week. And who do I have next week? Oh, by the way, I totally forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, today is Veterans Day in the United States. So any of you veterans, thank you so much for your service. We appreciate our heroes in the military. And next week, I don't have a guest, I don't think. So surprise, you're going to have to come next week.
I can be also next week if you want.
Or this is another plug for my my Patreon. Jump on our Patreon, just sign up for free. You don't have to pay anything, and then you'll get an email once a week that says who's going to be on the show and what podcast is getting released and all that stuff. So thank you all for showing up. We'll see you next week. See ya. Ciao.
Bye.